So I'm going to pull up chat, and I'm also going to go ahead and send out another tweet. Let me see. All right, very cool. So I'm going to give people just like a couple minutes to filter in before we actually start getting working on stuff. But today I am joined by Jun Cho, who is a psycholinguistics PhD student at UPenn, but currently joining us from Korea. UPenn classes have gone virtual, so no reason to be here right now. So Jun is, in addition to being a psycholinguistics PhD student, also does a lot of work with R, with data visualization. So right now I have his blog pulled up. It is yjuncho.github.io. So definitely go check that out. And I think to get started, we're going to be looking today at the data for this project that I've been doing on the Office. So the reason I have a psycholinguistics person here with me is because this data is all about linguistics errors. So this data set that I'm working with is this running gag in the show that Michael Scott is always basically like botching different phrases or like mispronouncing things or making all kinds of different errors. And what I had done originally was gone through and realized like there's some patterns in how these errors are made. Sometimes he's misquoting people, mispronouncing things. Other times it's more grammatical errors. So I had sort of like started to categorize things. But then I got to a point where it was basically beyond my knowledge and I felt like I needed some help. So very serendipitously, Jun happened to be watching one of my streams last time when I mentioned that I needed an expert and reached out. So thank you very much, Jun. And yeah, I think, do you want to go ahead and start by going over just sort of like a high level overview sort of some linguistics terminology, things that how we form words, I suppose, so that we have a better understanding maybe when we start going through the data and some of this terminology actually in detail.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I could start off by kind of setting the ground for what production actually means in the cognitive system. So when you want to communicate something, you have to get from an idea or a concept that you have in your head to the actual stream of sound that comes out of your mouth, or like communicated through hands, because sign languages are also a thing.
Yes.
But the way of getting from that first point to the end point is kind of complicated, but it's also structured in a way. So I guess I could go over like an example. Say I was walking down the street with a friend and I see a cat and I have this reaction or emotion and I think that the cat looks adorable and I want to communicate that to my friend. And so I would first start off with kind of a rough concept of what I want to say, the entities that are involved, the event or the actions. And that might look like a set of kind of features or more specifically semantic features like furry, feline, and pet to kind of refer to this concept of a cat. And once you have those features activated in your mind, then that would in turn activate words or lexemes in your mental lexicon, which is kind of the dictionary or the set of vocabulary that you have. And so in this case, furry, feline, and pet would strongly activate the word cat, but it might also spread over to other kind of words that you have, like rat and dog. And at the same time, it might also, when you have those words like cat, rat, and dog, and you have retrieved one of them, say a cat, so you have correctly retrieved the target word, then you also have access to information like the part of speech and whether it's singular or plural. So those are kind of the syntactic features, grammatically relevant features. And once you have, all the words, once you have retrieved all those words in that kind of way, then you can go and try to pronounce them. So words have their pronunciations that are stored with them, just like, meanings are stored with words. So in this example, you have the word cat, you have a pronunciation for that word, and that gets translated into movements in your tongue muscles, jaw muscles, to eventually kind of allow you to say like, oh, that cat looks adorable, and that's like, and then it leaves your mouth, and then you're done.
Okay.
So that's kind of like, an example of how the speech production mechanism kind of gets you from the concepts to the words. And if anything goes wrong in the process, that's when you have speech errors.
I see. And so this is sort of like this diagram actually is a good like high level overview of some of the domain definitions I think that you gave me, right? Because it seems like a lot of these like domains sort of meet at different levels of this tree, so to speak.
Right.
So maybe I should bring that up. So one of the things after I messaged June and basically asked like, what am I doing? What am I doing wrong? And so he gave this really, really interesting way of thinking about it, which is that I was sort of breaking these down at like one of the lower levels that I could do, which is like specific errors like eggcorn or mispronunciation, but it really helps to go up to higher levels. So let's talk about that a little bit. And let me know in the chat, guys, if like everything, I think the sound should be fine, like the video should be fine, but let me know if there's any issues. And I meant to also play a little bit of background music. Let me start some background music. Again, this background music is courtesy of Gabriela Jiqueroz, who is the founder of Our Ladies. So thank you, Gabriela, for the music. Okay, so I made this little chart. Hopefully you can see this. It tries to break down these errors into the different types. And so the first sort of classification is linguistic or non-linguistic, which is basically if it's actually related to the language production or if it's just that Michael lacks knowledge of what he's talking about. So let's go to the data sheet actually and give an example of this, which might be helpful. Let me make this a little larger. Okay. So a good non-linguistic one, let me find like a good one. Yeah, so here's like Michael says, he's like, oh, the deal was one punch, which I absorbed. I had no idea there'd be a second one, so catch 22, which is just like, it's an error because that's just not what a catch 22 means. So in that, but it's, like not really related to the language production, I think. But then these things are kind of, there's like a lot of cases, I think, where these are sort of up to like interpretation, because you're making this judgment of, does he know what he's talking about or does he not? And sometimes they include like multiple errors that sort of overlap with each other in a certain way. So it's not always so clear cut, but this was, I have to admit, like one of the easier ones to choose, and it definitely helped me to separate these out a lot. Because actually when I was collecting this data originally, that was one of my big sort of like uncertainties, was that I knew that a lot of these weren't necessarily strictly like misquotes or botched phrases, but they still seemed to kind of fall into a bucket where I wanted to keep collecting them. And the non-linguistic linguistic distinction is really good for that. But let's go back to this Figma document. So I think that one is like pretty self-explanatory. But then we get into the linguistic things and we start breaking it down more, and it's not not necessarily as self-explanatory. So this is where I think I'm gonna need some help for sure. So you talked a little bit. Do you want to talk about like if I've done this right. Does this make sense as like a breakup? Are there more categories that I should include here? Like, what are these categories exactly? Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, June.
Yeah, I think that looks great. That's very like simple, intuitive explanations of all these like fancy words. But like syntax means grammar, phonology means sound.
Mm-hmm.
So those are like pretty straightforward. And in terms of what you can include and exclude,
Mm-hmm.
it's honestly a bit kind of up to you because
Yeah.
at this stage of kind of trying to categorize different linguistic errors, this is more like analytical and not like nothing that's like grounded in psychology. So
Mm-hmm.
you can make as many distinctions as you want in there, but these are the ones that are most often talked about, and I think they mostly capture the linguistic errors that you have in your data, except maybe orthography, because Michael's not learning anything.
Yeah, that's
Leave that out if you want.
yeah, there were not very many. So I went through this list and tried to categorize, and there was maybe like one where I always put question marks on all of these, and so there's like maybe one where I'm like, I think this might actually be orthography, but or orthographic error, but I'm not sure. So I think another question I had was then like this next level of breaking this down. It seems like, at least in the information you sent me, a lot of these errors fall under are like phonetic errors, or like phonology related errors. So these were some of the ones that I had, like mispronunciation, eggcorn, malapropism, and then you sent me this one, which is metathesis, I'm going to say. And metathesis or metathesis, I don't know what you want to call it. But and these all have sort of like specific but slightly different definitions. And so I did end up making this document. So these are like the domains that I came up with, or that you came up with. And then I started making this actually a long time ago, with trying to get just like some definitions of what these mean, because sometimes it's actually really hard to tell, like, what is the difference exactly between, for example, like a malapropism and an eggcorn. And so I started doing this, and I had a couple questions. So first is like, in this list that I have, are there other like really common... Oh, so first of all, it was mixed metaphor. Where would a mixed metaphor fall? I tentatively put it under semantic, but I really don't know what this would be.
I guess it would kind of depend. It could even be like non-linguistic, in the sense of like, if it was something that was intended, that wouldn't make it an error in the first place, like a pun, maybe?
Right. Yeah, like a pun.
Yeah. So that's like one thing, I guess, to consider. But in terms of maybe like accidentally getting something wrong, but having it come out to be, I think there was one with like this Superman and Batman example that was kind of one of those things that like could be considered non-linguistics, but I actually categorized as semantic. Let me see if I can try to find that.
Let me go into so I have an example here in the data, actually. I have a couple of examples that we can talk about. So this one is maybe like, this one, I don't know, like this might be an example. You labeled it non-linguistic. So there's a well-known quote, or like a idiom, which is like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And then Michael says that as fool me once, strike one, fool me twice, strike three, which is mixing this idiom with like the baseball thing of like 3 strikes and you're out. And so that's the case where like when he's like incorrectly blending or confusing 2 different idioms or 2 different metaphors. That's the case where like, do you think that typically would fall under non-linguistic, or is there some element there of like semantic mix-up?
I guess maybe it would depend on how you would define semantics, and that's kind of the thing that like we spend their entire lives on.
Yeah.
But I guess like the narrow definition of semantics that's kind of in the like diagram that was being talked about is pertaining to features of concepts.
Okay.
And so I guess when you're mixing up idioms, I don't know if idioms have like features that gets mixed up in production. Although, yeah, that would honestly, that's where a judgment call.
Okay. It's
so
just, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to say that like you can't, or like trying to gatekeep the definition of something.
No gatekeeping linguistics.
Yeah. But yeah, I think you can kind of, play around with the boundaries of what you want of the meaning side of semantics, like what kind of meanings should be considered a long linguistic meaning and what kind of meanings should be considered non-linguistic meanings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think as long as we can come up with a coherent story, like psychologically how this might come about, then I think we have ground for calling it a linguistic error and thus a semantic error, and not just like Michael doesn't know these idioms or these metaphors.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one way to put it. I think it's like, like he obviously knows these metaphors, or he's like aware of them. Otherwise, he wouldn't use the idiom or the metaphor, right? But like he's not aware of how to use it correctly. It's maybe like he's heard it somewhere but doesn't really understand what it means, or doesn't understand like why it works or why it means what it means. So yeah, that's one of those that's like very on the line. We'll get more into this list later, but I have one more question since I'm sort of stuck on this semantic thing. Because like in this definition this isn't like the end all be all. This is just me looking at these definitions on this website and like extrapolating them to the data. But there's this example where, okay, so the quote that Michael says is, he says, oh, society teaches us like you shouldn't cry and whatever. And he says, oh, I think that's wrong. He says, because grief isn't wrong, there's such a thing as good grief. Just ask Charlie Brown. So this is a reference to the cartoon Charlie Brown, where Charlie Brown, like one of his catchphrases is like, good grief. But it's like an exclamation of exasperation, not like good grief. What do you think about this example? Do you have any thoughts about that example?
Actually, I do, and this might kind of catch you off guard if you like don't think about this as a career. But I might actually categorize that as syntactic, because I think that's like a parsing error. So Michael heard good grief and parsed good as an adjective and grief as a noun, but they're actually just like I don't know how you'd call it, like an expression. That's
it's like an exclamation almost.
Exclamation. It's not like it's not like two distinct units that like compose into one. It's not like good modifying grief. It's just like an exclamation. So I might say that might be a syntactic error in terms of Michael just doesn't has the wrong idea of how they're organized in the grammatical structure.
That's a really interesting take on it, actually. I'm going to write this down. Okay, so I'm going to say syntactic. And I highlighted all these ones in yellow are the ones that, let's see, how do I reset? Are the ones that I filled out. So maybe this column is just going to be called like notes. So where did I put that one? Okay, so syntactic, because he identifies the good as adjective and grief as noun rather than the whole phrase as an exclamation, something like that. That actually did kind of catch me off guard, but in a good way. It helps me understand stuff better. All right, so that was question 1, I think. So mixed metaphor, it could be like, I don't know, I'll just put it up here. Could be anywhere. So it could be like non-linguistic, syntactic, or maybe semantic, depending on the scenario. All right, interesting. Then this is like a very open question, and your answer is probably just going to be like, yeah, there's tons of them, but like, you can't like make a giant list. But beyond like these, are there any you think like types of errors that would fall at this level of classification that are like big ones that I've missed or that should be included here?
So the reason why I kind of has sorry, keep going.
Well, and some of that might come out also like as we go through the examples, you might be like, oh, this is a good example of like this type of error or something. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We should table that. But to the first kind of part of the question, the reason why I kind of hesitated to make edits in those columns is because I don't know of like the fancy literary terms for them. So like allotropism, and that's probably something that someone who like studies like English or literature might be more qualified to tell you about. But there definitely are ways of categorizing or making like more narrower categories within these broader like domain level categories. So I guess I could go over like some examples of what that might look like.
Yeah, definitely.
It wouldn't be like super fancy. So one that I had in mind was like, I don't exactly remember the specific example, but there was one where Michael used something like more something when you or x or just x see if I can just search like more.
Definitely made it perfect.
Yeah,
there was one. So there's one where he says, "Can I make it more perfect-er?" And there's another one where it says, "Yeah, you said something else, approachable-er." Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of error actually comes up a lot in children's speech. So when children are learning, you would call these productive, but like kind of units that you can just slap on anywhere and it would like produce new things, like the suffix. They kind of, when they're trying to learn those kind of generalizations, they undergo a stage at which they start over regularizing. So this happens with like past tense, for example. They would say I goed instead of saying like. So they have like a rule, and then they overgeneralize it to instances where they shouldn't. So more x should mean that the x just like shouldn't change. But then you might add er. And so that's called over-regularization or overgeneralization, but it's not like a fancy word, and I'm not exactly sure if it's talked about in adult speech errors as much as it is in child speech errors.
I mean, yeah, it's not. I'm sure there's not. It's not the first time that Michael will make like children's speech errors. I think that's probably going to come up again. But so this is interesting. That typically, like you said, I think you said it falls under morphology usually, because this has often to do with like suffixes or prefixes, or tense. Yeah, I actually emailed this person. I think his name was like Jeff Pullum or something, and he's like a linguist. I think he's the person who invented the word eggcorn. Or one of these terms maybe, and he was giving me some interesting answers. He wasn't available to help a ton because he was busy writing a book, but he was like, I gave him a few examples from the list that I thought were interesting, and he was like, yeah, those are interesting. Maybe we need to change the definitions of these actually based on that thing. But okay, yeah, so now I think we can just start going through the list maybe, and this will sort of like get into the nitty-gritty of things. So I think I'm gonna most of these early ones it looks like are pretty well filled out. So we have the domain, and then we have this like error type, which is the more specific error. So this is sort of that third level of classification, and this may or may not be filled out for a lot of these because, like June mentioned, like there's not always like tons of extra things beyond the domain level necessarily, or it's just hard to decide what it is. Like a lot of times it's sort of like up in the air what it is, and so it's a real judgment call. And for the non-linguistic ones, obviously they don't have this type of error. Or you could maybe come up with some classifications, but it would be very different. It would be still something not linguistics related. So
you need something else for that.
Yeah. So I think we'll just focus on the domain for now, probably. And I'm going to go ahead and trust. So these ones that are like just already filled out like this, these are ones that June already did for me. So I'm going to go ahead and just trust you on those. I might have questions. I think there's a couple that I marked and I have questions on. But beyond that, there's a bunch of them that getting later on that I either are not filled out that we can discuss, or that like I highlighted and I tried to fill out, but I want to confirm it or like see what you think about it. So, okay, so I'm just going to start going through them all. Let's see. So these are all filled out. These are all good. Okay, this one I have no idea. Let's talk about this one for a sec. So the thing is, he says, I'm going to make this slightly bigger. Yeah. The thing is, he says, let's gang bang this thing and go home. What he means to say is, let's bang this thing out. But he's like substituted this other phrase in there. Do you have any ideas? And you can also say, no, I have no idea, and that's fine.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
A lot of them also might be non-linguistic in this case.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure if there's a good story for retrieving like phrase level things. So like obviously, you know, like gang bang is not like just two words separately and then they join to form a word. They're like, you know, they have space between them, but they might as well be considered a single word.
Yeah, it's like a separate phrase. Yeah.
It's a judgment call. You could say that those kinds of things like idioms or phrases, even though they span over multiple words, are actually like words. So they're also in our mental dictionary, our lexicon. And so if you go in to retrieve like an idiom, you might accidentally retrieve partially and then retrieve some other parts of the idiom. Or like in this case, I guess you have like bang it out, bang this thing out.
I think that's what he's trying to say. Because like that's normally a phrase you'd use as like, let's just get this done. You know, I think that's what I think he's meaning to say. But yeah, there's also the judgment call in me trying to decide what he means, or what the correct phrase is. So that's like a second layer of judgment call.
Yeah, but I think if you had to give it like a domain label, I think I would go with semantic as opposed to just like entirely non-linguistic. And that's because I think the difference between linguistic and non-linguistic at least might be easier to decide on if you think that you can spin a coherent story about retrieval and failures of retrieval, because that's mostly what's being involved when you're trying to plan speech, is that you have a concept and you're trying to retrieve the relevant kind of linguistic units that would make up the sentence that you actually say at the end. And so here, you know, Michael has like an idea, a concept, and he's also trying to retrieve bang this thing out as a phrase, like a verb phrase, right?
Yeah.
But then accidentally retrieves another phrase, unintended. And so that would be considered a linguistic error in that case. And you can describe that through like a psychological process involving speech planning, as opposed to just like Michael didn't know what this was, so he kind of just like guessed and pulled random words.
Okay, is this I'm trying to summarize this in like so this is like you would say if you were to classify this as a linguistic error, let's like, you know, that is the given, then you'd say it's like a semantic error because he's retrieving like the wrong phrase. He's like, you know, two phrases, and during planning phase, he's retrieving the wrong phrase essentially. Okay, cool. I like that. I'm going to put that there, and then I'll think about that a little more later on. So next one is, this one is a little simpler. It's just constructive. He substitutes constructive compliments for constructive criticism. And I don't know, this also could be a non-linguistic one. But maybe it's similar to what you set up here, actually.
Yeah, I guess that one would depend a lot on the actual context. It was
Yeah. Yeah.
If he was like if it was like asking for compliments and he said compliments, that's probably he just doesn't know.
I think it was because, so the context of this one is he wants people to give feedback in like a suggestion box. And so, but I think in his mind, what he wants is like, what he's expecting, in Michael's world is that like people will just submit suggestions that tell him how great he is. And so I think what he wants is constructive compliments, even though it's constructive criticism. And actually, this quote goes on because when he says, please get in your constructive compliments ASAP, Kelly says back to him something like, don't you mean constructive criticism? And he says like, well, Kelly, that was neither constructive or a compliment. So why don't you just like get writing or something?
I think in that case, it might be non-linguistic because he is using the phrase wrong, but not like unintentionally. He just has a wrong kind of idea about what that phrase means, but nothing went wrong in the planning process.
That's true. And that's a good point. Maybe that's sort of a good general point because there's actually several cases where people correct him in the show and then he doubles down on it. Or like he doesn't understand their correction. So that might indicate like if he doesn't receive a correction and like recognize it, maybe that's a signal that like it's a non-linguistic error because he legitimately believes he's using this correctly. So I think this one again I think is like non-linguistic. This is like he doesn't understand the parts of speech. He doesn't understand the difference between the words implying and inferring. Then let's see this one. We're going to sell that to charity. I think this one is a linguistic error, actually. I don't know exactly which type it is, but what he says is they have this little mini Christmas tree and Kevin holds it up and he's like, what are we going to do with this? And Michael says, well, we are going to sell that to charity. But you don't sell things to charity, you give them to charity. But I think it was like an unintended, it seems the way he says it in the moment seems very unintended. Like he's just reaching for that word give, but he comes up with sell.
So he doesn't need to say he's going to sell it and then get money back for it, but just
like I don't think he legitimately thinks he's going to get money back for it. I think it was like just an error. So maybe that's again semantic error.
Yeah, I think that's again semantic error. And the story could be something like you're trying to retrieve a verb that involves like an agent and a recipient of an action, right? So give is one of them, but sell is also one of them.
Right.
And we're talking about like, transactions or like, giving of goods. And so you might plausibly misretrieve the word give and instead get back sell.
Yeah. This is like people often mess up buy and sell at the same time, especially when they're speaking another language. People often do that, not a non-native language. So this one I'm going to skip. I don't even know if this is an error. I just put that in there for random reasons. So let's see. What is the next one? The party cleaning is all over it. They've been working 24/7 all day yesterday. I think this is a non-linguistic one. I think he has no idea what he's talking about. I think this is also non-linguistic. I'm going to put, I'm not sure about that one. I'm going to highlight it, but I'm going to come back to it later. I think I want to, this one is also, I'm kind of going to like move through a couple of these fast until I see good ones where I think you could really help. So let's see. There is, Yeah. What about this one? Okay, this is maybe an interesting one. It's sort of another one of those mashup ones. So he says peace out Seacrest, which is a reference to peace out, is like goodbye. And then the Ryan Seacrest, like used to have this, like, he's like the celebrity presenter, if you don't know. So he used to have this catchphrase where he would be like, Seacrest out. And that was like his catchphrase. So I think because of the, my theory is that because of the presence of out at the end of peace and Seacrest out and peace out, he's confusing these and says peace out Seacrest. Any thoughts?
I think you're right about that being kind of similar case with like the mixed metaphor situation, which also means I don't have any further things to say about it. So if you make a judgment call on mixed metaphors, well, I think that would cover this issue as well.
Okay, yeah. I'll just put like similar to mixed metaphor, and we'll think about that later. Let's see. This might also be a similar case as some of the ones above with the semantic errors, where he substitutes, what he means to say is that they're friends with benefits. He substitutes friends with privileges, which is sort of a similar word, but the idiom doesn't mean the same thing.
Right.
So is that another case where you'd call that like a semantic? He's reaching for the word and he just retrieves the wrong thing?
Yeah. Okay. I think, it would kind of have to depend on whether Michael, knows the idiom, doesn't know it, partially knows it, stuff like that. But
yeah.
It's plausible to say that he was trying to retrieve benefits, but retrieve the, adjacent neighbor instead, which is privileges.
Yeah. So, like, assuming he knew the phrase, then it's a semantic. Otherwise, it's just he didn't know the phrase, obviously. Yeah. So, okay, this one is interesting because it's it's one of those ending ones, maybe a morphological error. He says Afghanistani instead of Afghani, referring to people living in Afghanistan. And then there's a second error here where he mixes up. So this is actually a blend of two errors. So maybe we'll like split them up and talk about them separately. So that's the first one. The second one is he says he's going to donate to this charity he calls Afghanistanis with AIDS, which is not a charity. He might be referring to a charity called Afghan Aid. So what about the Afghanistani thing?
I think that could plausibly be morphological. As you said, it's kind of getting the word ending wrong. So if you meant to say Afghanistan.
So the correct term should be Afghani, right? For a person that is from Afghanistan, but he does Afghanistani, yeah. And then any like Afghan aid, I think that just he doesn't know what the charity means. I think that's just a non-linguistic error. Yeah. I have no idea about that. We're gonna skip that one. Okay, now we get into where I actually started trying these. This one, I guess it's very similar to a lot of the ones we've been talking about. It's like, does he know the phrase or not determines what it is, because he confuses the phrase skeletons in his closet. That's like the idiom, and he replaces closet with attic, skeletons in his attic. So I guess I'm assuming that's a similar one where like if he doesn't know that phrase, then it's a semantic, or if he does know the correct idiom but he says it that way, then it's a semantic, and if he doesn't know it, then it's just a non-linguistic error.
I think actually now that I've seen like a lot of these like idiom errors, maybe this is something to do with like idioms are, they only make sense with the exact like words that are used, right? Like even if you have like synonyms, you can substitute them into idioms to get the same idiomatic meaning. I think the general idea here with Michael's errors is that he stores idioms not as like holistic phrases, but as like, concepts of that are, like, I guess like decomposable into individual words that can also then be switched out. So if that's how Michael understands idioms, then retrieval makes sense because Michael's individually retrieving those components of an idiom, and then one of them goes wrong. And so you get like this partial idiom that doesn't make sense for us who, stores idioms as a phrase, not as
Yeah.
string of words.
Okay, I'm gonna try to write this down because that was a really interesting note. So correct me if I'm like summarizing this wrong, but basically, so what you're saying is like, so like normally we store idioms as a like single phrase. So it's like similar to a single word in terms of the meaning, but Michael might be storing idioms as collections of words with their own concepts. And then when he substitutes one, like skeletons in attic versus skeletons in closet, it's a semantic error. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, and I think
Okay.
maybe you can add that for Michael, when he's retrieving idioms, like he has a concept of what we want to say, and he wants to put that in an idiom. Then
Yeah.
retrieving an idiom isn't getting the phrase; it's getting the individual words. So you could go wrong at one of those words in the idioms that he's retrieving.
Okay,
especially
yeah.
all or nothing in terms of getting an entirely wrong idiom.
Right, so when he's retrieving the idiom, he isn't retrieving the entire phrase, but the individual words. Okay. Interesting. All right, that's a good idea. So I'm gonna go ahead and call this one semantic then and just move on.
There's a lot of these, right?
Probably, yeah. I think I'll probably go back through like after I do all this and like double, triple check all these and see like what comes out after I've learned more of this. But there's definitely a lot. Yeah, I think there's a good number of those for sure. Yeah. So this one, he says, oh, Jan says I underestimated you, and he's like, well, maybe next time you'll estimate me, which could be non-linguistic because that's just not how that word works. You can't change it like that.
I'm gonna say, and this might also catch you off guard, but I'm gonna say that's morphological.
I was gonna think that. Yes. Okay, I'm getting better.
Okay. Because this is kind of, I guess you could call it that. You could call this like trying to force a back form. So back forms are, probably know, like for people who don't know, the word edit, for example, is people think that edit and being the agent of someone who edits is editor, but it's actually backwards. The word editor came first, and then people were like, oh, is like a productive suffix, so why don't we back form the word edit from editor? And I think that's what Michael's trying to do here, but you can't do that. So that's one of those like overgeneralization of productive rules that don't apply in this case. So estimate and underestimate don't have the same relationship as other, like, under and kind of words.
Okay, cool. Maybe sort of similar. I was unsure on this one if it's phonological or morphological. So he says he means to say effortlessly. Instead, he says effortlessly.
I think that could, I don't exactly know. So he was trying to say effortlessly, and that's like the meaning that he intended.
Yeah, like he says, oh, a real relationship can't be forced. It should just come about effortlessly, is what he says.
I think that's should just be a pronunciation type.
Yeah, that's just right. Yep. Okay. And then going down the list, the This is another one. I think actually maybe this one you marked as phonological, so maybe it is, but I thought maybe it's morphological because the mistake he mixes up is nutritional versus nutritious. So he says, I'm sure that they're very tasty and nutritional, which that ending should be nutritious in this context.
I think that's so I don't know if nutritional is a word. Is it?
Yeah, it is. You could say like but nutritional is like the adjective form, I think, because you'd say like the nutritional value of this food is whatever. But if you're just talking about the food, you'd say it's nutritious.
Yeah, so. I think you're right in that case then. It's probably using the wrong suffix there.
Okay, cool.
And it kind of makes sense because both are adjectives, right? Nutritious,
nutrition,
but they're used in different contexts. So maybe one of the retrieval cues is that you're trying to find a suffix that turns a noun like nutrition into an adjective. You retrieve the wrong one. And that doesn't make sense in this context.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay, cool. Krisef says, gotta go, but been super enjoying this. Cheers. Thanks for hanging out. So, okay. So this one, I think it could very simply just be a non-linguistic, but it's kind of an interesting example. So, okay, so Michael says, can't we all just get along, or have we forgotten the words of Reverend King? So he's referencing Reverend King, he's referencing Martin Luther King Jr. But this quote, can't we all just get along, is actually from Rodney King, who said this during the LA riot. So it's different people with the same last name of King. And he's attributing the quote to the wrong King person, if that makes sense. So there could definitely be an argument, obviously, that it's just non-linguistic, but do you think there's any linguistic argument for it?
I think, honestly, this might be a point where we might even have to look at like the writer's intent. Like intentional that the people that, have adjacent, like similar sounding names are also, like semantically, I guess, like similar. I think there is enough ground to call this semantics. And there's actually, were you able to look at like the Moses illusion ones that?
Yeah, I have this pulled up, in fact. So this is a webpage that June sent me about a type of error called a Moses illusion. So it says it's a phenomenon whereby listeners or readers fail to recognize an inaccuracy or inconsistency. So people answer 2 to the question, how many animals of each kind did Moses take on the ark? Even though they know that Noah was the one on the ark. Yeah, that's a good example, actually.
And this is kind of maybe going back to like when I was explaining like the mechanism thing. There is potentially a little disputed, but possible module in the speech planning system where before you send everything off to like your muscles to pronounce, the comprehension system actually steps in and kind of does like editing or reviewing of the material that you just generated. So when you're like, doing production, the comprehension system is actually like, okay, let me just double check that for you before that leaves your mouth. And in that sense, errors can persist if the comprehension system kind of is affected by an illusion that this makes sense when it doesn't. And that could also be a test for whether this could potentially be an error. Like, could people hear this and get the meaning that was intended by the speaker, but the form itself is wrong?
Yeah, because this is also part of that is like maybe even seen in the show, because if you watch the videos, if you see these happen in the show, one thing that I noticed is that a lot of these have reactions from the cast. So when he'll make an error, sometimes it just kind of goes unnoticed. Sometimes they will like verbally correct him, like, you actually meant to say this. And then sometimes they won't correct him, but the camera will just have a facial reaction from somebody being like, you know, like giving kind of a confused face, or like they obviously know he made a mistake, but they're not saying anything. Jim, of course, it's always Jim who does his like classic Jim face with like the raised eyebrows. And he does that in this case. I remember Jim has that reaction to this one. So yeah, that could be it. But that's an interesting point. I didn't think about the illusion part. Okay, I'm going to keep that there. I like that idea, and I'll return to that later. So let's see. Moving on, I think a lot of these are just... oh yeah, okay. So any ideas about this one? He says, I had an epiphany when he means epiphany. It's just, I think it's just a mispronunciation in that case, correct? Like that's just like
I feel like, well, I mean, this actually shouldn't really matter. I do think it's actually pronunciation, but there was like the epiphany was also a word, and I wasn't exactly sure of its meaning, so I don't know if it was like something.
Oh, I didn't know that was a word.
Yeah, but I feel like that's, you know, Michael probably doesn't know the word epiphany. Maybe he just like
it's a Christian feast celebrating the manifestation of the divine nature of Jesus to the Gentiles as represented by the Magi, traditionally observed on January 6th. Wow.
Yeah. I call that phonological error.
But that's another really interesting one where maybe the writer intent has something to do there, because I almost guarantee you that some writer knew this and they purposely put that in there because it's like a very obscure reference that no one would know except the writer, and maybe like maybe people know this. Maybe people that are more Christian. I didn't really grow up like learning Christianity and stuff, so I don't know. But maybe people that are like in that specific sect know that or something. But okay, I'm gonna label this as phonological, but it's an interesting one. I'm probably going to say about every one of these quotes that it's interesting. Just, I think I'm saying that about every single one. But okay, so that one I'm not sure about. I'm going to skip that. But this one I'm very curious about. So the phrase is supposed to be, the idiom is supposed to be, the early bird gets the worm. He says early worm gets the worm. Maybe this is going back to that same conversation we had earlier about how he parses idioms as like collections of words and not single phrases. You think this falls into that same bucket, or what's the verdict?
I think that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Trying to retrieve for like an animate noun, for example.
And he kind of like had that in his mind already because there's already the worm is in the phrase. So, yeah. Okay. Let's go there. Okay, this another classic. Okay, so he says in this quote, he's talking to people. He says, actually, it's polite to show up early to a party. Only really good friends show up early. Ergo de facto, go to a party early, become a really good friend. So I don't know how familiar you are with like Latin or how this is used, but you know, like, okay, so normally, so ergo is Latin, and normally you would say like, it means, what does ergo mean? It means like, therefore is what it means basically. So like, go to a party early, therefore become a good friend. Ergo, become a good friend. That's how it should be. But he adds de facto on the end of it, which is another Latin thing that means like, I don't know, like what does it mean? Of fact or something? Like a in reality. So that's what de facto means. So he's mashing up these two Latin phrases. And as I'm explaining this to you, I'm realizing I think it's non-linguistic. Because I think the reason he's making this error is because probably he's heard people using these Latin words, but he doesn't really know what they mean. So he just pulls them out and uses them, but he doesn't really know how to use them, so he just uses them incorrectly.
Yeah, I think that sounds plausible.
But it's more like he's using them incorrectly because he doesn't know what they mean. So I'm gonna skip that one. That's a weird one. And yeah, by the way, let me know if you have to go at any point. I don't want to like take up all your time or anything, but I'm just having fun going through these. So
Too.
okay, cool. Okay, this one I'm very, very interested in. So he says he's worn a woman's suit by accident, and someone points out that this is a woman's suit that he's wearing, and he says, I don't think it's totally just a women's suit. I think it's, at the very least, it's bisexual. So what he means to say, obviously, he means to say it's unisex, like it could be worn by either sex, but bisexual is like the sexual orientation. I think this is like a linguistic error of some type. I just don't know which type. Because I think he knows he's used the word bisexual before, and he obviously knows what it means. So I don't think it's like that's the reason he's misusing it.
Then I think I think it could be construed as a semantic error.
Okay.
Wanted to describe something relating to like an adjective about gender clothing, but the gender part kind of caught him up. He retrieved the wrong adjective.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty plausible.
Okay. This one, I think, so you wrote this, but I'm just curious. You wrote phonological and then you wrote lexical. Can you explain what that means? So the error is, he says that a concern for office workers is a sedimentary lifestyle. And sedimentary is like a word that means like a type of soil, like it's like a type of rock. It's a geology term. The correct thing would be sedentary, which means like you don't move a lot, like you have a very like non-active lifestyle. So what is the lexical part of that there?
So that was at the point when I was like toying around with adding a lexical layer, except everything that we talked about in terms of phonological errors that aren't just like mispronunciations, but mispronunciations that also devolve into another word entirely. Since we categorize those as phonological, I don't think we have to put lexical here. I only put lexical here just to make a note that the phonological error ended up in a totally different word, as opposed to, some other errors that we had earlier. Effortlessly, those kind of things. So yeah, I think just phonological is consistent with what we've been doing so far.
Nice. Here comes my favorite, the orthographic one. I don't know. Okay, I also don't know. Maybe it's like a linguistics thing. Like I know in linguistics it's very different. Like, written word, like written language is completely separate from spoken language. So maybe orthographic only refers to written language, but I thought this might be orthographic because he's in the song. This is referencing a song called Respect by Aretha Franklin. And oh, wonderful, you get to hear the sirens. In the song, the lyric is she spells out RESPECT. And he says, like, in the quote, he says like RESPVT or something. He's like, he forgets how to spell it mid-sentence, so he just kind of like says some garbled words. Does that make you rethink this as a non-linguistic, or do you still think it's just non-linguistic?
I mean, there's actually a whole other thing with the web page that I sent you that had orthographic listed under linguistic. That's actually something that's kind of contentious, whether our spelling system is part of a linguistic knowledge, because people have had language before we've had writing systems. And I'm actually personally on the side of orthography isn't a linguistic knowledge, but just there's fluent speakers of English who are illiterate, and that's like fine. We still consider them native speakers of English. And so I think that is definitely orthography, and I'm surprised that you found one. You might even have one in like speech. But But I think at the end of the day, we might just want to say that that's non-linguistic, and I think that would make it kind of cleaner for us to talk about the domains too.
Yeah, I'm just gonna like leave it like that, but I'll say like probably but yeah, I mean, is that like, because I kind of agree. I mean, I think not that my opinion matters at all because I'm not a linguist, but like I kind of agree with the idea that like orthography should generally be restricted to not like spoken language. But is this maybe like an interesting outlier case where like if you're trying to speak and like spell out a word as you speak, then it could be actually included in that definition?
In the definition of like linguistic errors?
Yeah, like would you, I mean, so basically what you said is like there's the contention is like you shouldn't really include orthographic as a like linguistic domain error. Was that what you were getting at? Saying that like, yeah, okay.
I think it's just like a memorization kind of thing.
Memorization,
Like,
okay,
yeah. Of a word doesn't include its spelling. It's kind of just a thing that's stored separately.
Okay.
So like knowing that respect is RESPECT is kind of the same as like I don't know, like knowing that like when you have ABCD, the next letter is E.
Right.
in my like very like linguistics opinion, but
okay. Well, that's interesting.
Contentious ones, and like I said, you know, these domains are not like settled. You have the kind of some freedom of excluding and including them. And I think that that's true in terms of the theory as well. Yeah.
Okay. This one, oh yeah, I actually am gonna change this. I think this is non-linguistic because I think he doesn't know based on the context of the scene, I think he doesn't know what any of these tools are, and so he just says some random words he's heard, but he doesn't know what they mean. Okay, I don't know. This might all just not. I think this might all be non-linguistic. That's my inclination, but I wanted to bring it up because it happens like so many times. There's like 3 or 4 examples of this same error coming up. So he says Pam DEFCON 10. So DEFCON is a thing. I don't know where it comes from. It's some branch of the military, I think, or some like it's like military speak or something of one of the branches of the military. Somebody in the chat yell at me if I'm wrong or tell me this if you know anything about military stuff, but it's like it means like it's like a level of danger. So there's like DEFCON 1 through DEFCON 5 are like different levels of like crisis. And this is actually a very, very common mistake that people make. People will say this like as a exclamation, like, oh my god, that like, you know, shit's hitting the fan, like it's DEFCON 5. But actually the way that the system is set up, DEFCON 5 means no danger, and 1 means like emergency crisis. So actually like 1 is more danger than 5, and so people always mix up that error. So Michael says DEFCON 10, which is not a thing because it only goes from 1 to 5. But also he says the higher number, which like is also the wrong thing. Like it should be the lower number. You think it's just non-linguistic? I think it's non-linguistic, but
yeah, I think it's non-linguistic. That's so funny.
Yeah,
I can kind of imagine the writer's intent behind that, like just so like obviously wrong. And
yeah,
not subtle like pronunciation error or anything.
Yeah,
just like totally wrong, has no idea.
Well, in the same episode, like 10 seconds later, he runs out and says DEFCON 20. So yeah. Okay, so I think this is one where I think this might, I kind of think this falls into the same semantic idiom thing because the quote, I think it's from the Bible, I assume, or something. It's cleanliness is next to godliness or something. I don't know who says that, but that's like the phrase, but he says forgiveness is next to godliness. So I'm going to go ahead and say probably it's that same kind of phrase semantic thing we were talking about.
Right.
And yeah, this is a classic. He says, I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. So I don't know. Do you know superstitious? You know, is like yeah, it's like the I don't know. How do I give a definition of superstitious? So all of a sudden I can't come up with a definition. But yeah, inclined to believe in superstition. Okay. Yeah, believing superstitions, religious or otherwise. That's the same problem I was having. I was like, how do you define that without using the word superstition? Anyways, so you know what that means. But then this is one where maybe it's like that. Maybe it's morphological.
Yeah, like, I think it's the underestimate situation.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, this one I tried to classify. I think this is just a mispronunciation, I'm pretty sure. He just says someone's name incorrectly. He says Minushka, and he means Makushla. I'm pretty sure that's just a phonological.
If he knows it and just says it wrong, yeah, I think that's definitely phonological.
Yeah, like I think it's from a movie, so I think he watched this movie and then so like obviously he should know what the name is, but maybe he's just like remembering it wrong or something, or yeah. I kind of skipped that one. I think that's a phonological based on what I read, but yeah. This is a classic mixed metaphor, so this is probably the same thing as like it's a judgment call. He tells Stanley that he is fired like a heart attack, which he's trying to use this phrase, which is I'm serious as a heart attack, which is just a way to say that you're really serious about something. And I don't know why he says it when he says you're fired like a heart attack. Oh yeah, that's why. Okay. It's because he tells Stanley you're fired, and then Stanley says, are you serious? And Michael says, I am serious. We are all serious. You are fired like a heart attack. Because he's thinking of serious, and so he means to say, yes, I'm serious as a heart attack, but then he says you're fired like a heart attack. Easily probably put under non-linguistic. Any ideas of linguistic arguments for that one? I think the reason I thought it might have a linguistic justification is because of this thing where he's saying, he's like primed almost. He's primed because the question is like, are you serious? So. Yeah,
I would say that's, yeah, I think you can get away with calling it semantic.
Oh, okay.
I say it because I personally don't have like a great idea of this either, but I think you're totally right about the priming part. Mm-hmm. And like I said, during planning, the very first thing you do is kind of gather up the rough bundles of features that in turn activate words. But in like a context, if like a word has been activated prior, then that might be a strong competitor when you're actually going to retrieve another word. And so,
yeah.
What was it? Serious for fired? Yeah, that's possible.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah, this is maybe like one of the most layered ones in here, actually, this euthanize thing. This is the one that I actually emailed this person. I emailed that professor that I mentioned, and he gave a really interesting answer about like why he thinks it's an eggcorn, but which would probably put under a phonological. So yeah, okay. So what Michael says is, let's get some fresh blood in here. Let's euthanize this place. So he's using what he's thinking in his head is that it's this, which is like youth, and then he's adding this NI's ending to it. But then euthanize is actually a real word that's spelled this way that means, like assisted suicide or like putting someone, so any thoughts?
Really straightforward, I guess, even like correct answer would be both phonological and semantic. And I think I might have done that like earlier for eggcorns. That's just like how eggcorns are defined. Is that it's phonological neighbors that are also semantic neighbors. And I guess it kind of depends on, does that like create complications for your visualization? Like, should we force one category
I like that idea though. I mean, I'm gonna write that down. Like, so like, basic definition of an acorn is like the, what did you say? Like, it's the substitution of phonological and semantic.
Yeah, phonological neighbor that's also a semantic neighbor.
Okay. Also a semantic neighbor. So,
so even the word eggcorn itself, eggcorn,
acorn, yeah.
You know, so that's where like the definition of that comes from.
I think that's really interesting. I can also, sometimes it can be difficult to decide what is an eggcorn and what is like one of these other errors. But I think I can see in the visualization, I think it'll depend sort of how I'm classifying them. I think my initial inclination, if I was like asked right now, would be that we would only classify them visually by this domain, and like the extra layer here, this would just be like maybe in a tooltip or something. So I think that like this I might use to like color the little papers by, you know, I might come up with a coloring scheme for these different types. And it would be cool that it's basically a mixture of both, because then I could have one color for phonological and one color for semantic, and then for these eggcorns where it's both of them, I could do a gradient of those two colors to indicate that it's both. So I kind of like that idea.
And actually, like, I don't know why this came to my mind, but I was thinking of like Pokemons with two types.
Yeah, like yeah.
Square with diagonal crossing through it.
Yeah, it could totally be like that too. Like, yeah, it doesn't have to be a gradient. It could just be like both of them divided by a line or something. It's a good idea.
I'm glad that you have that in mind, because yeah, it definitely helps, at least for eggcorns, that
right. Yeah, I think that's one of the things I'll do maybe later, like when I go back through this and kind of review all of them, I'll look and try to like really look into them and see like which ones are eggcorns, and if they are, then I'll just tag them as phonological and semantic, since that's, you said it's sort of like a basic, it's baked into the definition. So cool. Okay, I think this is maybe, there might actually be a linguistic argument. Tell me what you think. Okay, he says he's downloading N3P music instead of MP3. The reason...
If you like what MP3 is.
Yeah, like maybe he doesn't know what MP3 is, but it's like, I'm also wondering if maybe it's just because N and M have such similar sounds. Is that a possibility? Like he's just mixing up the N and the M sound?
Yeah, that's totally a possibility. That would be a phonological error.
Okay. Yeah. So like
yeah, unless if he like, you know, has a word N3P in his lexicon and he like meant to say N3P.
Yeah, I don't think N3P is a word though.
Yeah,
maybe it's in his lexicon, but yeah. I have no idea. I'll go skip that one for now. Okay. Most of these are good. That one's weird. This one is just him doing math wrong. Okay, this one I'm pretty sure this is like phonological, correct? He says the idiom is supposed to be cut off your nose to spite your face, and he says spider face.
That's really funny. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, this is another one where maybe it's one of those like semantic things where he's doing them, because he's saying he went to the park to feed the pigeons, but I guess they all flew west for the winter, but pigeons fly south, not west. So it could just be non-linguistic.
Yeah, there'll be a judgment call on if you think Michael knows that pigeons fly south, but then said west.
Yeah.
Because he was trying to retrieve like a direction.
Yeah. I think I don't know. That one's really on the fence. I'm trying to think about the context that it's in. Probably non-linguistic based on the way he says it, but who knows? This one I think is is a funny one. It's phonological. He keeps talking about Cupid, and then he's like, you know, Cupid is like the little baby with the bow, and he shoots arrows at people like the Greek mythology, but he keeps saying Cupid's sparrow instead of Cupid's arrow, which is pretty. I think it's just a phonological one. Yeah. Oh, do you have any ideas about? I'm completely baffled by this one. He says ASAP as possible. It was like as soon as possible, as possible.
Well, I am not sure about the domain, but I think that probably should have a name, like Eggcorn or something, because like you know, like ATM machine, like
oh
stuff like
yeah,
I hear those a lot.
that's
So
a
I feel
really
like
good example.
some like internet linguists might have come up with it ASAP as possible.
Because that's like, so yeah, something where you have an acronym and then you add you're like repeating part of the acronym, being unaware that that's part of it. It's sort of, yeah, I don't know. It gets outside of maybe that realm, but it's just like a funny thing. It's so common. So my partner is Pakistani, and then so like in Hindi or in Urdu, the word for tea is chai. But like in the US, it's very common if you go to like Starbucks or any restaurant, you see they advertise chai tea on the menu, which is like tea. So it always drives all the Indians crazy. But
yeah, I don't have a good intuition for it, but I'm sure that, you know, like this could be Google searched with a couple other examples alongside it.
Yeah. Okay, hypocritical, that's I think pretty just phonological probably. Yeah, this one I'm not sure. So the error, I think, he says I'm gonna stay up all day and I'm gonna sleep up all night. I think what he's trying to I don't really know. I'm kind of uncertain, honestly, about what he's trying to say. I think it might be he's trying to say that he's going to stay up all night and sleep all day, because the point he's making is like he's going to work really hard, or maybe he's saying he's going to stay up all day and stay up all night. But the error I kind of focused in on was the idea of sleep up, which is like, you know, like some incorrect usage of a phrasal verb, I think, which I classified as syntactic. But what do you think?
I agree with you on that too.
Okay.
I think a lot of errors involving like, you know, mix up of like in, at, on, stuff like that. It's more straightforward to categorize them as syntactic because they kind of, you know, play the role of combining constituents and stuff like that. And those like little function words in and of themselves don't have a lot of like semantic content.
Yeah.
So at least between semantic and syntactic, I would say that there are syntactic errors.
Yeah. Okay. This is a very common error, by the way, that I learned of for these types of verbs. These, when you have like up, on, in after the verb and it makes a phrase, it's a phrasal verb. And I have learned from several friends of mine that are English as a second language learners that this is one of the most difficult things about English to learn is phrasal verbs and all the different meanings of like tie up versus tie out versus tie on versus like tie in. These all have like completely different semantic meanings, but yeah, I've been told horror stories from my friends that are usually they come from speaking Spanish and then they're trying to learn English.
Yeah,
little tidbit. So okay, then let's see. This one, I think I'll just skip that one for now. There'll be other ones. This is maybe just probably non-linguistic. Basically what he does is just leaves off the end of this he leaves off the end of this phrase. So, you know, the common phrase is keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. But he just says, you know what they say, keep your friends close, and then it just like stops.
I would probably say it's non-linguistic, but I feel like maybe it depends on the context. It might not even be an error, because I know some people are like, when in Rome, that kind of
thing. People mess that up a lot too.
So I think it's definitely non-linguistic, though. I think you're right about that.
Okay. This one I'm pretty sure is a phonological. He mixes up. Jim says, "I will see you titans of industry upstairs," and Michael's like, "Well, no." He says, "We're not only tight ends, we're also quarterbacks." So tight end is like a position in football. So, I think he's just titan versus tight end. And classic one here. How the turntables, and then he just trails off. And the phrase should be how the tables have turned.
Yeah, I see that a lot. People making like that. Wow, I am.
Because turntable is a real word as well. So turntable is like a thing that DJ uses when they're mixing records. So that is also an actual word, which is maybe changes things.
Yeah, I think that definitely does. Maybe it's something like malapropism. I want to say that this is phonological and maybe like a hint of semantic, but I think I would definitely characterize this as a linguistic error. Definitely involves phonological, maybe semantic.
Okay, that helps. Definitely knowing it. There's some linguistic error here. I think this is just non-linguistic. This I'm pretty sure is just phonological. Truffled versus trifled. That's non-linguistic. Oh, this is constant. Everyone says this. I think it's more common, actually, that like for American people, it's more common to say espresso when it's espresso. Which drives me crazy, but
and there's also another really common one: nuclear and nuclear.
Yes. So this is actually similar. You gave me that was one of the it was metathesis. Yeah, good one. This one, he says, "Gotta keep yourself dehydrated." Obviously, he means hydrated. The reason I'm hesitating over this one is because, like, I think if it were a linguistic error, you'd say it was a morphological one, right? Because it's like dehydrated, hydrated. But I really think it's probably non-linguistic in the context that he says it.
Maybe you could, like, if you wanted, I mean, this is also a judgment call, but it could be semantic in the sense of, like, just because, like, things are antonyms doesn't mean that they're not semantically adjacent. Things having to do with water is itself a feature, even though hydrated and dehydrated are opposite words, they might get activated at the same time. So there could be a story that you could say.
Okay, I'm just gonna make some notes. I'll look into that one later. I like making myself laugh as I read these. Okay, so Michael walks in. He says, they're all laughing, and he says, "Oh, what's so funny?" And Pam says, "Oh, you had to be there." And Michael's like, "Oh, geography joke. I love those." I mean, obviously it's like you had to be there is like it's only funny if you saw it happen. Doesn't mean it's about geography. Is this probably, you think, just non-linguistic, or?
Yeah, I think he's just like interpreting things like literally, which is, not like a fault of the linguistic system. Yeah.
That's a good one though. This one, I think... God, this is such a weird one. This one is like, the context is he confuses soup snakes for soul mates, but the context in which he does it is he reads it off a piece of paper. And the paper he's reading, I guess maybe it's like written badly, and he says like, he's like misreads it or something. So this one I have no idea if I'd even classify it as an error, because it's like, he's like misreading something, so... I don't know. Unless you have any objections, I'm just going to like mark this whole row as questionable.
But I think your story about it being non-linguistic in that context is very plausible if you wanted to pursue that.
Yeah. So I'm going to replace that. I'm going to say it's probably like, if it's an error, it's a non-linguistic error. This one is just bizarre. I have no idea. I'm going to skip that. I think it's a writer making a very obscure joke. This one is more like, I think actually some linguistic error. He says anorexia, and he says, oh, so she's an anorexitic, where it's it should be anorexic. Which
yeah.
Is it just phonological in that case, or is it morphological because it has to do with the ending of the word?
It depends on if you meant to put in the ick ending, but then pronounce it as etic, or if you meant to put in the etic ending, or like if you meant to put in the ick ending, but then ended up putting the etic ending,
okay,
which is also morpheme, right? Yeah. Judgment call.
Okay. Morphological or phonological. Cool. And then, let's see, that one's non-linguistic. Enliven versus enlighten. It seems like that's just a phonological to me. This one's weird. Okay. So what he's trying to do here is, there's this famous palindrome that is a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. So it's, it makes the same phrase if you read it forwards or backwards. So Michael is trying to repeat this because someone says like, what's your plan? And he doesn't know what to say. So he's like trying to like make something up to stall for time. And so they're like, what's your plan? And he's like, my plan, a man, Panama. Which is not... it's like clearly he's trying to do this, but it's not coming out right. Do you think there's any linguistic element?
I would be more comfortable saying it's non-linguistic in the same kind of way that we categorize like the crescent, whatever.
Oh yeah, that one.
Like Latin words thing as kind of.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Just like miscoding or just like, throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. What about when he mishears something? That's a question I had, because I think this is the only example, but here what happens is someone says there's no such thing, or someone says, oh, mobsters. They bring up like mobsters, like from the mob, and Michael says there's no such thing as monsters. So he mishears monster as mobster. Do you think, is there any such like linguistic error of like mishearing things, or is that just a non-linguistic?
Sure. Yeah, especially if mobsters, monsters are kind of phonologically close. I don't know how that fits into like speech, like production aspect of these errors, but I think that's a very like plausible error.
Okay.
I think monsters meant monsters.
Okay, so that's a phonological error. Nice. Yeah, because it's like the error is in his hearing of it, but then he also repeats it when he says there's no such thing as monsters. Okay, here he says the rest of the story has been censored due to inappropriosity. That's not a word. I think he's mashing up two words, or maybe he's just not knowing what the word is. As I'm saying it, maybe I'm just giving away that it's non-linguistic, because the word should be inappropriateness or impropriety. But he says inappropriosity. Non-linguistic? Linguistic?
You could make a case for it being linguistic.
Okay.
Potentially like morphological, or if he was trying to retrieve both words but they got like jumbled together as one word, that could be phonological.
Okay.
So yeah, it depends on what you want to say he was trying to say. If he was trying to say inappropriateness but came out as inappropriosity with like an osity ending, might be a morphological error.
I think...
If he was trying to both.
So I'm trying to remember the exact context, and I think this is also something I'm just curious about. You know, when people speak and they start saying one word, and then like halfway through speaking, they like switch to another word, and so they kind of smush them together. So like the classic example from a movie is in the movie Mean Girls. She says gruel, and then she like laughs and she's like, "Oh, sorry, I started saying great, and then I decided to say cool, and it came out as gruel." Is there a word for that? Because I sort of think that's what's happening here, is like he starts saying one thing and then he sort of like gets confused halfway through and finishes it another way.
I don't know if there's like a specific category like eggcorns kind of thing, but I would at least say that would be phonological in that case.
Okay.
You should separate them out into different words, but then, you know, during motor planning, something went wrong and you kind of just like smush them together.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. This one I think is pretty obviously it's an eggcorn. This one is also, I think, usurped and uslurped is a phonological. Another mispronunciation, which is phonological. Okay, there's a couple of interesting ones here. So he's having a conversation. He asks Oscar, "What are you reading?" And Oscar says, "The Atlantic." And Michael says, "Oh, that's my favorite ocean." So obviously Oscar was referring to the magazine, not the ocean. Is this a semantic? Is there a linguistic argument there?
I want to say non-linguistic, because I feel like Michael understood that to just mean something different, but it wasn't due to like an error on his end. Like he just heard the, he took that to mean the ocean and then responded appropriately using that, knowing that concept. Whatever.
Yeah.
So
okay.
there was no error between concept and motor speech.
That's a good explanation. Okay, this one I don't even know. So Michael's asking Oscar, again talking to Oscar, he says he's asking him like where he got some information, and Oscar says the manual, like as in the manual that you read, and Michael says Manuel who? Like Manuel, then you know, like the Spanish language name.
Yeah, I think that would be non-linguistics in the same vein.
Okay.
That's funny.
Yeah. That one I had to rewind several times because I was like, wait, something's wrong there, but it's weird. Okay. I'm going to kind of just like skip through. I think a couple of these are pretty obvious phonological ones. And is this phonological? He says the odds of them getting together was insurmountable. When it should be insurmountable.
Yeah, phonological is probably, the path of least resistance. I don't know if we want to like spin a story about like, oh, he also accidentally retrieved the word mountain because mountains are also insurmountable, or like something like that.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of how you explain a lot of these. Is like if you really wanted to force it, you could probably come up with a justification for some of them. But yeah, like you said, phonological is like path of least resistance. That's a good way to put it. Oh my gosh, one that actually might be orthographic, because it isn't something that Michael said. It's something he wrote. So he wrote, this is Jim reading a note that Michael wrote him. And he says, when arrogant salesmen are mean to my face, a certain manager will go to his moppy place. And then he's on the phone with Pam, and Pam is like, he means his mopey place. So I think it's just like the misspelling or like mixing up of words, which would be orthographic. Is this correct?
I might say that even though it's like in writing, it might be a phonological error.
Oh, damn, I thought I had an orthographic one.
Just because like, I think for something to be orthographic, it would have to be like a spelling error that doesn't involve the kind of linguistic domains.
Okay.
Like if you said like mopey with like an IE, like that's clearly like something wrong with the spelling. But if you like thought of the word moppy, PPY, instead of mopey in his planning and then wrote it down as that, then there's nothing wrong with the writing down part, which is the orthography. There's something wrong with the planning part.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good explanation.
That's like the really confusing thing, because when we think of phonological, we kind of restrict it to the domain of speech. But even like sign languages have quote unquote phonology. So smaller units that are in and of themselves not words, but composes together to form like words and intonation and whatnot.
Okay. Maybe you can also just punt this one and be like, I have no idea, but he's speaking another language. He's trying to speak Spanish, which he doesn't know. And he keeps messing up the genders. So, like, he's like saying la telefona and like referring to people as like Angelo instead of Angela. So basically he keeps messing up the genders. Is there like, does that fit under any particular thing, or is that just like mixing up your grammar?
I think it might be like I want to say it's kind of similar to like the Latin case. It depends on if he's like actually a speaker of Spanish, because like the planning kind of module thing assumes that you have knowledge of the language that you're talking about.
Well, in this case, he does, because he's specifically trying to learn Spanish because he's planning to go to like a Spanish-speaking country or something. And so he's been taking lessons. Like Oscar has been teaching him Spanish, and Oscar is explaining, he's like, yeah, the lessons aren't going too well. Like Michael's trying, but he really can't get the gender thing down.
Oh, okay. That's cool. But yeah, case and gender would be morphological.
Okay, because that's also a very common problem for learners of gendered languages when they come from a non-gendered language. I make gender mistakes constantly when I'm speaking Spanish, so Michael is not the only one. Baguette and barrette, that's a phonological one. I'm going to skip that one. I have no idea. I think this is non-linguistic, but maybe you can, I don't know, you can weigh in. Okay, so this is, the context is earlier in the episode, Pam has said, things are running amok. And Michael's like, what does that mean? And she says, it means it's out of control. And he's like, why don't you just say that? And so then later on in the episode, Michael says, things are going to spiral out of amok, thinking it means control. Do you think this is just him not understanding the correct usage of it, or?
Yeah, I think he just, didn't learn the meaning right.
Yeah.
So he knows what he wants to say, and he said it, and he thinks he says the right thing, but it's just wrong from an outsider perspective. Right.
Okay. This is another DEF CON one. I think we decided those ones were non-linguistic. And let's see, phonological, that's pretty obvious. Blair Witch Project. Okay. this is another one. He's mushing together two concepts. He says this is like the Blair Witch Hunt Project. So the Blair Witch Project was a movie, and then a witch hunt. Obviously, like witch hunt is like going after somebody. And what he's trying to say is that it's a witch hunt, but he adds in this aspect of the Blair Witch Project, which I don't know why he does. So he adds in this layer of like the movie title. I'm actually going to correct this. I think he's trying to just say witch hunt. I guess this gets back. Maybe I should just make a note. It's sort of the mixed metaphor thing. Unless you have any brilliant ideas.
Yeah, I think that's the case. It's kind of a similar thing with like how he thinks he can substitute words into idiom to like shift the meaning of the idiom the way he wants it, but the idiom just loses its meaning entirely. I think that's kind of a similar case here. Trying to probably like say something like grandiose, but like adding a movie title into whatever he's trying to say, but it just like loses all meaning. Like, what are you saying?
Oh, that's a good interpretation. I never thought of it that way. Yeah, he's trying to like make it some big great thing, but that's a good interpretation. Let's see. I'm gonna go skip down to this one, corporate fat suits. Yet another mushed together concept of there's a concept. So there's a phrase of fat cats, which means like big indulgent people, and then corporate suits, which is like like the corporate guys, and he mushes those together into corporate fat suits. So maybe that's the same. I'm just gonna maybe I may should just call that the same thing, mixed metaphor thing. Is there a word for this? Maybe is there a category for this, do you think? Or is it just non-linguistic when he says backstabs people in the back, when all you need to say is backstabs people? Or you could say stabs people in the back, but adding both makes it wrong or weird.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it would be like an error because like it still like makes sense. It could like
that's true. That's actually true.
Also a judgment call. Maybe it might be related to like the ASAP as possible kind of thing. I'm not
yeah.
Sure.
That's actually a good connection. I never thought of that. But you're right. I actually am going to mark this because it's not technically wrong. Although there's a couple on this list that are like, I thought they were wrong. I thought they were wrong immediately when I read them, or like when I saw them in the show, or even if you look up some of the lists, people will have them as like errors. And then I looked it up and I realized it's actually a word. Like it's not actually an error. There's a famous one where he's like, Jan is on the phone because Roy has just attacked Jim, and Jan is like, was this because he was a disgruntled employee? And Michael's like, no, Jan, everyone here is extremely gruntled, which just sounds wrong. But then I looked it up and it turns out that is actually the correct opposite of disgruntled. Is actually like, you can actually say gruntled as a word to mean like content worker. So yeah, this is another one. Okay, this is morphological. This is another gender error with Spanish, Latina versus Latino. This one, oh yeah, so how would you classify this one? He says, I didn't know if this is morphological or syntactical. He says he's going to learn about China and geography and math and literary, where I think it should be literature as the noun.
That's a good one. I want to say syntactic because it's just easier to explain it as like a part of speech error as opposed to like you retrieve the wrong like suffix for literature.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just have the idea or like the concept of literature, but then you, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Adjective.
I'm gonna mark this one semantic. This is the same. He does another classic word substitution into an idiom that makes it not make sense. Okay, we are nearing the end. I really appreciate you staying on for all this time, by the way.
This is really fun.
Cool. I'm glad you think so. I'm glad somebody else finds this interesting and fun. Let's see. Okay, so we got a few more cool ones. He says a day which will live infamously, which is not correct. Although infamously is a word, but it should be in infamy. Is what you would say, like a day that will live in infamy. Like it'll never be forgotten.
I think I want to classify this phonological semantic in the same way that we've been doing for like acorns, except I might just like not use the word acorn because it's a bit more specific.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I don't know. I have no idea what to say about this. He's imitating a Greek person in this scene. He's pretending to be Greek. And someone asks him some question. And he says, 9, I'm Greek. My name is Mykonos. 9 is German for no. It's not Greek. So he's retrieved the correct word, but in the incorrect language. Is there any word for that?
I want to say that if he's not a German speaker, it's probably just like non-linguistic.
Okay, yeah.
Because you can have interferences across languages if you're like a bilingual or multilingual speaker.
Yeah, I don't think this is like interference or code switching or anything, because he's definitely not a speaker of German or Greek. So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also have no idea what this one is. Also like kind of mind-boggling. And maybe it's not even an error because he could just be making a pun. So this is again, he's imitating the Greek person, and they ask him, "What is your favorite musical?" And he says, "My favorite musical is Grease, or as we call it, Home." So Grease versus Greece, yeah, which is like maybe just a pun.
Intentional because
yeah,
he made musical Grease and then he made it into a pun.
It seems like a pun, and it kind of seems intentional when he says it. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt on that one and say it's intentional. Okay. Oh yeah, okay. I put this one in here. The context is someone says, "Michael, this is inappropriate." And he says, "Yes, it is appropriate. Carry on." And I mean, appropriate isn't a word. So apropos is a word. Like, you know, it means like of the time, like timely, or like relevant to the topic at hand. And he somehow like twists inappropriate and adds apropos onto the front of it and then uses inappropriate ending, but also isn't understanding what they're saying, because he's like, "Yes, carry on." And they're like, "No, you're being inappropriate. Stop." There's a lot of layers to this one. I have no idea.
I also don't have a great clue.
I'm just going to say like non-linguistic. Because I'm not like... I feel like it's coming from him maybe he's also making a pun in this case because he's saying like, oh, it is appropriate. I think he might be like, I think he sort of knows what he's doing in this case. So I'm gonna, since you don't have a immediate like, oh, I know what that is, I'm gonna say it's probably a pun or a non-linguistic. So, oh yeah, this one is also probably non-linguistic, but it's possible maybe he's just pulling the wrong word because it's in the related category. So he buys the ring for Holly, and it's like this crazy fancy diamond ring, and they're like, oh my god, how did you afford that? And he says, oh, it's, 3 years salary is what you should spend on a ring. And there's this like old traditional thought that what you should spend on a wedding ring is 3 months salary. And so clearly he's misunderstood and thought it was 3 years salary. So do you think there's any chance it was like a substitution, like a linguistic error because the years versus months, or is it just a non-linguistic?
Not sure. I think it can go either way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like maybe the comedic intent of the writers could help disambiguate this. Like Michael really thought that he had to put in 3 years worth of his salary into getting a ring.
Yeah.
It might be a non-linguistic error, but
okay.
I can see that being part of the plot.
Arguments either way. Yeah. Okay, I think the other two are the rest of them are pretty obvious to me, like phonological errors. Now that we've done this, I think I have a better idea, so it's easier to classify these.
Yeah, and of course you can also use more than one.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, this was amazing. I think. Thank you so much, June, for giving 2.5 hours of your time. I really appreciate it. Calling in all the way from Korea. So yeah, I think I'm gonna be I'm probably going to be going back and watching the recording of this again and again to listen to all the explanations you gave, because I know there's things that I missed. But honestly, this was amazing. I feel like this just added such a huge another dimension to the project. I actually understand what's happening now, and I think it actually contributed to the story, because I think this piece is mostly exploratory, right? It's just oh, people want to explore and look at these quotes and it's funny, but then this whole linguistics thing gives it another layer, which is almost more of a information layer. There's actually some substance to it, and part of that is from what are these types of errors and why is he making them? And these are all, you've said, a lot of these are really interesting examples of linguistic errors. But then there's the next level, which maybe I'll have to read about, or maybe you'll send me some resources to read, I don't know, which is why are these funny? Because I know at least for eggcorns and a couple of these malapropism and spoonerism, some of these specific ones, there are people that study why do we find these things funny, which probably gets deeper into psychology than I have ever gone, but that's the fun part. So yeah, anyway, so my point is I'm really excited. I think this adds a lot to the project, and thank you so much. So
yeah, of course, thanks for inviting me. This was a really fun project for me to take part in.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so everybody, I will so June's blog, I said go check it out, yjuneshow.github.io. Search for June on Twitter. And I tagged him in my post that I did advertising this. So if you cannot find June's Twitter, go to my Twitter and look for that. And there will be no stream next week because it's Thanksgiving in the US on Thursday. But I will try to pick it up after that. I'm going to be moving out from Philly. I'm going to be not moving for good, but for temporarily, I'm going to be moving to my parents' house for a little bit just to spend the holidays with them. So I'm going to try to figure out a stream setup, but it may be a little more low tech. So we'll see about that. But I am going to try to keep streaming after Thanksgiving, between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So yeah, thanks again, June, finally, and goodbye, everybody. Until next time.